Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi, Lalas, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This show will be talking about, well, one thing and one thing only, and that is the roster drop, a little instant reaction on this live show. And so don't bore us, get to the chorus. But first, join me as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mosse, like I said, we'll talk about what we're watching later on, but this is going to be a succinct encapsulation of what has just dropped minutes ago, which is the roster for the U.S. team for this September window. Again, 2 games, one against South Korea, one against Japan. And also a reminder to everybody out there, after this window, there are basically 4 windows. You're looking at 8-9 games ultimately, and all friendly games for this U.S. team before the World Cup kicks off in 289-ish days from now next summer. So not a lot of time. So that's just to put a little context of what we're about to talk to. Mosse, you want to go through what we have here?
Yes. So Mauricio Pochettino has just named 22 players. He's going to add 1 more, so it will end up being a 23-player squad for, as you mentioned, games against South Korea in Harrison, New Jersey, and Japan in Columbus, Ohio. Keep in mind, this is an instant reaction pod. The roster just dropped. Mauricio Pochettino will be giving a press conference shortly in which presumably he'll give more context to some of his decisions. We're going to tape another pod later this week with further reaction. We'll be able to clean up anything we say that doesn't age well because Pochettino reveals something we didn't know as to why certain players were not selected. But yeah, some very interesting names on this roster and some very interesting names not on it. We'll take it from back to front. 3 goalkeepers, Roman Celentano, Matt Freese, and Jonathan Klinsmann. We know Matt Freese was the starter at the Gold Cup, but Matt Turner has since returned to MLS. He's playing regularly for New England. He's playing well. I am shocked he's not on this list. What do you make of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's going to be one of the talking points here is Matt Turner, as you mentioned, returning to Major League Soccer and returning to the New England Revolution. So this isn't a betting in type of process, although the New England Revolution in this current form is new to him. But, we had screamed and yelled about Matt Turner, kind of just banging his head against the wall over there and not getting the playing time and not having it go well for him. And so he did what I think a lot of us felt he needed to do. And well done, Matt Turner. And he's been playing well. But most importantly, like we said, he's been playing. And yet, usually in this context of this type of thing, you would say, oh, well, I'm going to let him, like I said, bed in and figure it out on the ground after a move like this. But again, this is a return to a league and to a team that he knows. So it's a little strange that Matt Turner in this case, unless Mauricio Pochettino just really says, this guy is not for me, regardless of where he is playing. I don't necessarily think that's the case. And I think the opposite side of it is I can't believe that Matt Freese now seems to be, I guess, the incumbent or the number 1 when it comes to this goalkeeper. Look, I know a lot of stuff can change, but yeah, it's very strange that Matt Freese isn't here. And speaking about strange, Jonathan Klinsmann, who playing for Cesena, was Serie C, now up to Serie B. I mean, completely out of the wilderness. But you know what? It sounds like the Pochettino Mosse is going to keep us on our toes.
Yes. We move on to defenders. At fullback, at right back, you've got Sergiño Dest and Alex Freeman. At left back, Max Arfsten and Nathan Harriel. And then 4 center backs, Chris Richards, Tim Ream, Tristan Blackman, and Noah Kai Banks. Blackman, of course, Thomas Müller spilled the beans on that and revealed that he was going to be on this list. Keep in mind, Jedi Robinson did come on as a second-half sub for Fulham this past weekend in their 1-1 draw with Manchester United. That was nice to see, but because he's been out a while, still undercooked. In U.S. Soccer's press release, they're referring to him as being absent due to injury, so that was strictly due to fitness.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Jedi Robinson. I'm glad he's back. I don't worry about him in this window because I think he's headed in the right direction. I do think it's interesting that all the talk about Tim Ream and old man Ream here, and now we have an 18-year-old in Noah Kai Banks playing for Augsburg, 6'4", and then Tristan Blackman, who we've seen for many, many years in Major League Soccer, both of them without any caps being brought in to bolster at least a competition for the center back position, which I think right now is in pen Chris Richards, and then, probably Tim Ream. But, the next man up, and can somebody come in and kind of really state their case and maybe even challenge Tim Ream going forward, or God forbid if somebody gets hurt back there. So I think that was done for that reason. And again, as we're talking about this, People like Joe Scally, who's been around for a while, is not. I really love that Sergiño Dest is back. He seems to be back, not yet 100%, but heading in the right direction. We know that he was kind of brought in and then left off in the summer, so I'm really happy to see him. And look, if Sergiño Dest, like we said 100 times before, if he's even 90%, 80%, 90%, given the lack of depth on that right back position, he's good to go, and he makes a huge difference for this team.
Yeah, Noah Kai Banks is one of the most interesting names for me. I've been asking for some new blood at that center back position, so I'm happy to see him on the list, more so than, say, a Miles Robinson, a Mark McKenzie, a Cameron Carter-Vickers. I know what those guys are, so let's see what Banks looks like, a young player who's gotten some playing time in the Bundesliga. And then, yeah, Alex Freeman at right back. We know he very nearly went to Villarreal recently. Joe Scally is interesting because we all think Mauricio Pochettino likes to build out of a back three, and Scally does offer that versatility. He's kind of a hybrid right back, third center back. So he's a guy I thought Pochettino would like, but maybe not. It seems like Alex Freeman has definitely moved ahead of him as that backup right back to Sergiño Dest, if you will.
Well, as we said, I think Pochettino is going to keep us guessing, and not just for this window. I think as we get into the World Cup, and he's been very, very clear about he doesn't care ultimately where you play. He just, I think, is going off of feel. There's a huge MLS part and component to this window, and while we've seen it at times traditionally in a summer, especially for a Gold Cup type of situation, the continuation with a lot of these MLS players, I think, he's putting his money where his mouth is when it comes to MLS in particular. But even, someone like Jonathan Klinsmann, he while I think he values good players and I think he recognizes and respects a good resume, he's not going to stand on principle when it comes to a player, regardless of where that player is playing. Shall we go to midfield now?
Yes, and this is where things start to get really interesting. 6 midfielders: Tyler Adams, Sebastian Berhalter, Luca Della Torre, Diego Luna, Jack McGlynn, and Sean Zawadzki. So if you're keeping score, no Weston McKennie, no Yunus Musa, no Johnny Cardoso, no Gio Reyna, and no Malik Tillman, who's out due to injury. He missed Leverkusen's game this past weekend against Hoffenheim.
Yeah, so I think people are going to immediately be drawn to the fact that there is no Weston McKennie. And keep in mind that he didn't miss this summer because of injury. It wasn't a coaching choice. He was playing with Juventus in the Club World Cup. But we also know that Weston McKennie is let's say, a unique character. And maybe at times he can rub people the wrong way. Again, we'll hear what Pochettino has to say, and I'm sure he'll be kind of diplomatic in the way that he talks about players. I don't think that this is, by any stretch of the imagination, a statement that Weston McKennie is not going to be involved going forward. But again, you could feel some of the angst and the simmering type of anger in terms of what Pochettino saw this summer. I do think that there is, within these lines or in between some of these lines, some of that aggravation that I think he felt is channeled into some of these picks, whether it's a Weston McKennie or leaving players out that are also of big names, and this is an interesting one. I'm sure there's lots of people right now are screaming and yelling that are watching this, that are listening to this about, well, why isn't this person here? And why isn't this person here? And is this the greatest collection of midfielders that we have ever seen? No, in terms of their resumes, but ultimately they have to perform. And these are two very, very good opponents that the U.S. is going to come up against in South Korea and Japan. So great opportunity for these players. And what it says about the players that aren't here is you better get your act together. And I'll be interested if Pochettino has talked to any of them, because that's not really what he does, Mosse. We've heard him say that while he wants to have a relationship, I don't think that there is a constant communication and back and forth when it comes to Pochettino.
Yeah, Weston McKennie, we should note, was a late sub for Juventus in their 2-0 home win over Parma. Jonathan David among the scorers there on the CONCACAF front. And Weston evidently did get racially abused by the Parma fans, so that's horrible. But yeah, him being out is interesting. Yunus Musa, who was an unused sub for AC Milan in their 2-1 home defeat to Cremonese, him being out. And Gio, we haven't talked about this yet, but big news on the transfer front. He is staying in the Bundesliga. He has signed with Borussia Mönchengladbach instead of Parma. I'm not surprised by Gio being out. I do think Gio and Musa are very much on the outside looking in right now and are players that are going to have to work their way back. In Weston's case, I think it's just Pochettino sending a message to him. But if this was the World Cup squad he was announcing today, I think Weston would be on it. And Johnny Cardoso is an interesting one. We know the struggles with the national team, but so far so good at Atletico. He started again this past weekend against Elche and played well. I assumed that was a player that Pochettino was going to want to give more opportunities because of his club pedigree. He just went to Spain to watch him in the Atletico's La Liga opener against Espanyol. He played well in that game. So I just assumed that was a player that was going to get more opportunities to see if he can translate his club form into the national team, but evidently not. He seems to have fallen down the pecking order as well.
Yeah, very strange for some of these picks that I think for a lot of people out there looking at them, they said, oh, this is an obvious pick. Well, again, with Pochettino, nothing is obvious. We get to see some familiar faces, and certainly Tyler Adams, who we said time and time again is not yet back to the Tyler Adams that we kind of need him to be for the national team. But I think Pochettino recognizes his value. And then the Diego Luna that blew up this summer, we'll see if he can parlay that summer and what he has done well into a continual type of effect and impact, positive impact when it comes to what's going on in the field. I think the Mosse one, not necessarily surprising. I think, as we said, the McKennie one, surprising. The Gio one, even with all the drama and the craziness surrounding Gio, he just needs to get himself sorted out. And so even if there wasn't that drama, I still think with that move, you might have said, all right, especially in this case, this is a betting in type of thing, and we know who you are. Get that sorted out so you're playing, and then I'll consider you come the next windows. But again, only 4 windows left for this team. So at some point, you got to dance with the ones that brung you, but I don't think that Pochettino is done assessing, and he probably won't be until that last day when he has to hand in his number of, I guess it's 26 for World Cup next summer.
Yeah, 12 of the 22 on this roster are returnees from the Gold Cup, and you really see that in the midfield. Pochettino evidently liked what he saw there from players like Sebastian Berhalter, Luca de la Torre, Diego Luna, Jack McGlynn, so they're all back and primed for a big role moving forward. And then there are 5 forwards in the squad. The strikers up front are Damian Downs and Josh Sargent, and then on the wings you've got Christian Pulisic, Timmy Weah, and Alex Zendejas. So Pulisic is back. So there's no sort of punishment for him skipping out this summer. And now we'll see how the Pulisic-Pochettino relationship progresses moving forward.
Yeah, I think if there was going to be a punishment, I think it was probably a bridge too far for Pochettino at this point. And that's all that the story would be. That's all that he and the players would be talking about. I'm not saying that it's not something he maybe had wanted to do, but I think he's also practical and recognizes that this is the best player for the U.S. team. This is a player that the U.S. needs going forward in order to be successful. This also gets into players that aren't here. Ajiman is still injured, but we saw him feature this summer. Balogun has been injured for a long time, although we saw him play this past weekend, so he's still getting back into it. Pepe, who I think when it comes to that striker position, which is still open, I think that Pepe kind of is the guy right now. Obviously coming back, doing well, and so he will be involved going forward. The Josh Sargent one is interesting because he wasn't called in, and he started off on fire over there in the championship again for the big redhead up there. And I think if you got a guy that's scoring goals and has an American passport, you gotta bring him in. So not a lot of surprises. We've talked about Alex Zendejas and how good he is from a club perspective, and still, like Johnny, hasn't been able to translate it to the national team. But this has kind of got to be last chance saloon for someone like him.
Yeah, Sargent, you mentioned, scored again for Norwich in their 2-1 defeat to Middlesbrough. Haji Wright got 2 for Coventry in their 7-1 victory over QPR, but he gets left out. And Damian Downs, who also plays in the championship with Southampton, he's included. I thought that was somewhat interesting. And yet, it's funny, Timmy Weah is back. Had he left Timmy Weah out, then he could have plausibly argued that some of the guys that switched clubs this summer, like a Johnny Cardoso, he wants to give him more time to bet in at their new clubs. But by including Timmy Weah, who just moved to Marseille, then he doesn't have that excuse with Johnny Cardoso, because then that would be a contradiction. It's an interesting roster. You mentioned Pepe and Balogun. This past weekend, we must say, was a pretty good weekend on the injury front for the U.S. because a lot of guys that we thought would still be out came back. Pepe was a late sub for PSV in their 4-2 win over Groningen. Dest started that game, by the way. And then Balogun actually started for Monaco in their loss to Lille. So presumably he's all the way back and fit, but it's only one game, so maybe Pochettino wants to give him a few more to get back into rhythm. Trying to parse out And that's why, we're looking forward to this Pochettino press conference coming up shortly, trying to parse out which guys were left out for some sort of fitness-related reason and which guys it was just a technical decision. It can be kind of fuzzy right now, with the European leagues just starting up.
Well, Mosse, as we wrap this up here, and we appreciate everybody tuning in for a nice, quick State of the Union here with this instant reaction to the roster drop. I don't think that this roster is going to do anything to allay fears for those out there that are fearful that this team is not good enough and that this team is not going to do the things that we want and that we hope and pray for next summer. I also don't think that this is going to do anything to change people who still are not sold on Mauricio Pochettino. We all know that he kind of marches to his own drummer, and that's all fine and well. Some of these decisions, if Pochettino didn't have the cachet of being Mauricio Pochettino and everything that he has done, although he's never done it at the international level, I think it would be even louder, the calls for what the hell is he doing when this type of roster drops, and the players that are there and the players that aren't there. But I do think that Mauricio Pochettino recognizes that he's going to be like, this is my way or the highway. And I can respect that. And we all know that ultimately he's going to be judged solely on what happens next summer. But we're not at next summer. This is where we are. We have all of the different narratives and all of the different drama that has happened over this summer and since he took over. And he is being charged and paid a tremendous amount of money to bring this team to the promised land, to do things that we haven't seen before. And when you see this type of roster and some of the head-scratching decisions out there, you can certainly react the way that we, and I'm sure others are reacting. And that's kind of what we do. And that's kind of the fun of a roster drop. But ultimately, they're going to get on the field. And individually and collectively, this new group that's going to come together for a very short period of time is going to face two quality World Cup level opponents. Certainly the quality that you would face in that group come next summer. And Pochettino is going to add it to the count, and he's going to put it all into his little calculator, and it's going to spit out 26 names, not just this window, but then the next 4 windows that come. But there's not a lot of time. There's no competitive games. They're going to have to manufacture the parity, and maybe that competition, and maybe that competition is going to be manufactured relative to actual spots on the roster, because you're not playing in tournaments and you're not playing games that quote unquote mean anything. There's no qualification for this team. So interesting times. We'll find out what Pochettino has to say here. We will come back, like Mosse said, later on this week, give you a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more in-depth type of analysis when we have a little bit more information. But Mosse, anything before we go?
Yeah, I am disappointed. I feel the same way today as I did when we did the roster release show with Stu for this summer. And I made it very clear then, it was less about the Gold Cup. It was more about those friendlies against Switzerland and Turkey, two teams that had gotten to the quarterfinals of the Euros. We all bemoan the fact that the U.S. rarely gets to play quality opposition outside of CONCACAF, and those would have been very valuable games, a lot of useful data points to see how your best players react against that level of competition. And by fielding the teams the U.S. did in those games, I think they largely wasted those opportunities. And I hate to say it, I feel somewhat similar here. You get to play South Korea and Japan, two teams that got to the knockout stages of the last World Cup. It would have been nice to see a full-strength U.S. team and how they would stack up. Instead, aside from Pulisic, Tyler Adams, a handful of other names, feels like kind of an experimental B-team-ish roster again. Maybe not. Maybe I'm misjudging how Pochettino views the pecking order, and I just have to accept the fact that he views this as being very close to his A-team right now. We'll see. Time will tell. But my instant reaction when I saw this list was disappointed that this is the roster the U.S. will be bringing to these two upcoming games. Now, Lex, we do have a few minutes here to hit on a couple of non-roster-related notes from MLS this past weekend. How about that free kick by Heung-min Son for LAFC in their 1-1 draw with Dallas? What a way to score your first MLS goal.
He's a big star. We've talked about him on the State of the Union, and I think how important he is going to be, not just to LAFC, not just to Major League Soccer, but, and not just to the actual X's and O's and the kicking of the ball, but the business of it. And it's wonderful when everybody's expecting you to do something and you actually perform. That's the mark of a star. It was interesting that, his free kick was in Dallas, a stadium that's under construction right now, but it was a big crowd, and it was a big pro-Sun crowd, not necessarily a pro LAFC crowd, but a pro Sun crowd. And, it brought up this, it's not a phenomenon. It's just the reality of when you have big time players and this happens, plenty of places, and we've certainly seen it happen with Messi, that you are going to have moments where they are a draw, and they are a draw on the road, and they will draw people that are fans of those specific players, all right? Because I know there was some talk about how can you possibly cheer for or against your local team, and what you're not really cheering against your local team. What you are is cheering for a specific player. And it happens all over the world. It happens in other sports, and it's going to happen here. But that's why he was hired, for lack of a better word, is to do what he does on the field and to generate the business that he generates off the field. So great, off to a really good start for him. And it's a new country, and it's a new culture for him too.
And then Thomas Müller also got his first MLS goal. He converted a stoppage time winner from the penalty spot for Vancouver in their 3-2 victory over St. Louis. Very controversial, though, because Laborde looked to have tripped over himself, but VAR reviewed it, and they claim to have spotted some contact from Joyner, the defender, to Laborde. I know Taylor Tolman and others were up in arms about this decision. What did you make of it?
Thought it was a penalty. I thought there was contact. That you needed VAR is fine, okay? Because that's what VAR is there for. I thought the defender took the wrong path and therefore put himself in peril, especially in the box. I also thought that, because there was in the context of the game and the referee did this or this. I always look at penalties, Mosse, obviously happening in the box, as it's like speeding, all right? Lots and lots of people are doing it. But you might be the one that gets dinged. And so you risk each and every time that you speed of being, in that moment, the one that the cop says, well, I'm going to pull you over. And if and when he pulls you over and you roll down your window and you say, yeah, but everybody else was speeding, that's no excuse. You're the one that got dinged. And in this instance, because of the action that the defender took, clipped his heel. I thought he clipped his heel. I thought it was a penalty, and it was fine. Müller stepping up and being the hero, again, a guy with a lot of attention and just a wonderful historical type of personality in terms of how energetic he is. It was fun to see him play a part. Hopefully he's going to play a part going forward.
And then we're taping this on Tuesday. Tomorrow, we have the Leagues Cup semifinals, all MLS. Inter Miami will host Orlando, and the LA Galaxy will host Seattle. So on our next pod, we'll recap those games. I'll just say, MLS fans, they're in this weird place because you want MLS teams to do well against Liga MX opposition, but it's almost like MLS dominates this competition to such a degree that it undermines the credibility of it because nobody thinks MLS is that much better than Liga MX. So they think something must be fundamentally out of whack as far as when the games are played, where they're played, and how seriously these leagues are taking these games. You want to see an MLS team win at the end, but you'd rather it be more competitive along the way because then you feel like it would carry more weight. I don't know. Am I crazy? It's just odd to me that we get to, in what is a competition that ostensibly is supposed to be about MLS versus Liga MX, we get to the Final Four, and it's now all MLS teams. I'm kind of less interested. I'd rather there's still a Mexican team involved.
Yeah, I mean, you can only orchestrate it to the extent that you can. And this is not ideal for the tournament. I guess it's ideal in terms of MLS and the MLS clubs that are involved in this, but that's not something that you want. Quick reminder, as we mentioned, Pochettino is talking right now and starting to get out some information here. And he's saying, I think, what you would expect in that some of these decisions relative to the players are that they are new to their teams, they're in preseason and blah, 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 blah. I think what the headline will be is that he is saying that this is the last camp, this window with South Korea and Japan, the last camp with the possibility of seeing new players, which I guess means that the following camp in October is going to be made up of the real players that have proven themselves in front of him over the last year. But to your point, Mosse, I think the pushback to that is, well, isn't that still a waste of these precious windows that we have? And to your point, Mosse, against two really, really good competitive teams. And why do you need yet another window to figure out what your best collection of 30 players, I guess, is?
Yeah, we'll parse out these comments and others that he makes in this press conference in our next pod. Also, on our next pod, we'll do the What Are We Watching segment, which is something that folks might have missed from today because I went to see the latest Spike Lee joint. I'm watching this true crime documentary on HBO that you've already finished, so we'll have loads to talk about on that front on our next show.
We got a lot, but we wanted to get into this and get, be a nice little quick bite, if you will. All right. Keep downloading and reviewing and rating and doing all the different things that you do out there when it comes to the State of the Union. I continue to be on the road out here. I'm heading to Columbus, actually, this weekend. Big football game over there, and I got some stuff that I'm doing. But keep pounding up and down, left and right, up and down when it comes to the fists and the subscribe and smash that button and all the different things on all the different platforms that we have out there. As Mosse said, we'll talk to you all again later this week with a little more breadth and a little bit more depth when it comes to what's happened. We'll hear what Pochettino has to say about this roster, but it's out, all right? In Pochettino you trust, or you don't. We'll see you next time. And until then, and as always, my friends, size the day.